with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, April 28th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live depths from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. I should say we're steps and steps and steps. On the program today, Professor of History, Director of the European Institution at Columbia University, Adam Tooze, on the normal economy never coming back. Also on the program today, PDB Part 2. Trump ignored more than 12 presidential briefings warning of the coronavirus epidemic. Meanwhile, new corroboration of the Joe Biden accusations threatened to blow up his nomination. The Paycheck Protection Plan collapses almost immediately. Small Business Administration systems. And good news, testing capacity is growing across the country. Bad news, Mitch McConnell wants to strip worker and consumer protections in the next coronavirus bailout bill. Meanwhile, return of... shoot. I wanted to come up with like Return of the Crybaby? I don't know. Trump pushes back and insists on still having his briefings. More Amazon worker protests. Meanwhile, the New York AG says their precautions inadequate. Navy releases images of an unidentified aerial phenomena, or multiple ones, I guess. And tragedy strikes. Diamond and Silk dumped by Fox News. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. Glad you could make it. And we got a lot of stuff to cover today. We'll try and get to some phones. Nomi Konst is going to be joining us in the fun half of the program this afternoon, as she tends to do, coming directly from her Nomaki show studio, I guess, annex, as it were. We're all in our annex studios these days. And for how long, we don't know. We're going to talk about the new story, I guess really more corroboration of the Joe Biden accusations. And I'm beside myself. I don't really know what to, I know what to talk about with this stuff, but the latest report is in Business Insider by a guy named McHugh, I think it is. And he is a reporter who basically was Ronan Farrow's partner producer on the work that Ronan Farrow did. I think now they're competitors of some sorts, but in terms of reporting. But these allegations, or I should say this last round of reporting, because it's found two new people to corroborate the accusations, more or less contemporaneous, that it appears there is going to be like increased at least awareness and pressure. We shall see where that goes. Simultaneously, of course, New York State decided to cancel the presidential primary. There's still other races going on. And I think they were talking about doing this vote by mail in June. But they shut the door rather quickly. So we will see how that goes. In the meantime, let's get to the, and then, we'll talk about Donald Trump ignoring the presidential briefings that were coming from the intel community. We got to worry about coronavirus. Got to worry about coronavirus. Got to worry about coronavirus. I'm not going to repeat it 12 times, but that's how many PDBs he got. And, this stuff, of course, will implicate the election as well. So we have this sort of dynamic that is a little bit scary, frankly, that we saw in 2016, which was two candidates possibly getting less and less popular as we get closer to the election. And we know that Donald Trump has a base that will allow him to, shoot people in the middle of Fifth Avenue. We shall see how strong support is for Joe Biden, perhaps. Meanwhile, let's get on to this horrible news. Let's just, this is very upsetting. This story about Diamond and Silk. Do we have any footage of Diamond and Silk? Do we have any of their tweets that they got fired for?
I don't know if they've come out publicly
with
a statement.
Apparently, it sounds like Diamond and Silk. Now, where do I have this? Number 10 here in my pile. Diamond and Silk, the famed duo, Lynette Diamond Areaway and Rochelle Silk Richardson. They started out as Trump, just major Trump video supporters. They went on to Fox News guests, and then they had a regular role with the network. Apparently, they have been cut from Fox Nation, which is the online Fox screening thing. They have been tweeting about, of course, which everyone I think takes for granted now, that coronavirus was basically born from 5G technology. That is the cell phone technology created the virus. And then apparently Diamond and Silk also said they'd avoid taking a coronavirus vaccine if Bill Gates is involved because he pushed for population control. And apparently, according to the Daily Beast, they will not be on Fox anymore because of those conspiracy theories. Now, of course, when you do your conspiracy theories, you really can't get that specific on Fox News. But let's go back to one of the great hits that Diamond and Silk gave us. And this was from February 2019 when they were attacking Cory Booker for his veganism. And what better way to do it than with music? Oh, we don't have any sound. Like I say, what better way to do it than with music?
You know what, Cory Booker? We got something for you. That's right. Hit it, Silk. Don't be messing with our meat when you know we love to eat. We grill it, fry it, shake it, and bake it, and eat it with our teeth. Yum, yum. Don't forget the seasoning salt, the hot sauce, or the barbecue sauce to top it off. Don't hate the cows, because you ain't down. Don't be messing with our meat.
There you go. Yes. It's pretty sad. to lose such greats in the journalism field as Diamond and Silk. But we will have to endeavor to recover. There you go. Hey, folks, one of today's sponsors is BetterHelp. They're giving our audience 10% off their first month when you go to betterhelp.com/majority report. BetterHelp gives you access to your own fully licensed accredited therapist via phone, chat, or video. A lot of therapists elsewhere have long wait lists. It can take weeks or months before they can see you. But when you sign up with BetterHelp, they match you with a therapist based on your specific needs, and you'll be communicating with them in less than 24 hours. Folks, obviously, there's a lot of need for talking to a therapist at this point. If you do not have a relationship with one, if they do not have the ability to connect with you, via Zoom or telephone or FaceTime or whatever, this is a great time to take advantage of what BetterHelp offers you. Once BetterHelp connects you with a therapist, if you don't feel like it's a good fit, you can switch to a new one at any time for any reason, at no additional charge. They have thousands of licensed therapists from all over the country, so they have therapists with specialties that may be available in your area. They're obviously very attuned to what's going on right now. BetterHelp also tends to be more affordable than therapists that you would find through traditional means. You don't have to have insurance to use BetterHelp, and they have financial aid options for those who qualify. BetterHelp is giving everyone in our audience 10% off your first month when you go to betterhelp.com/majority report. That's BetterHelp, BETTER, help, HELP.com/majority report. Before we take that quick break and get to our guest, Adam Tooze, today, just a reminder, one little plug. Still looking for, and we had a couple of people respond with some helpful information, still looking for helpful information to help out a family that is looking for either a service dog or perhaps an emotional support dog. They're not 100% sure which is the best fit, but they're looking for resources for those and potential funding resources for those. For a young child with some special needs, and it is a tough situation. Obviously, these stay-at-home things, but it's also apparently a good time for the child to get some companionship. So, if you have any information on that, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. Just put dog in the subject line, and we will get that information to those folks. Thank you again for your responses up to this point. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Professor of History and Director of the European Institute at Columbia University, and writing a piece, The Normal Economy is Never Coming Back. Adam Tooze will be right back after this. Okay, we are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome back to the program Professor of History, Director of the European Institute at Columbia University, writing in foreign policy. The normal economy is never coming back. Adam Tooze, welcome back to the program.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's just, talk about, one of the things that has struck me and that has been sort of stunning is that there seems to be perhaps a lack of urgency amongst our lawmakers, and certainly sort of a general sense of a lack of awareness of the implications of what we're going through in the economy right now. And it seems to me a function of those trillions of dollars that the Fed pumped into the financial system and into the corporation, into the sort of broadly speaking, corporate bailouts. So there seems to be sort of a lack of awareness of what's happening in, I don't know if you call that the real economy, but it feels like the real economy.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I mean, there's an extraordinary disconnect right now between financial markets, the stock market, the S&P 500, even more NASDAQ, and the unemployment numbers. What we're seeing out of the unemployment insurance registration systems of the states of the United States, all of them now, is quite simply the most severe economic shock that we've ever seen, including the 1930s, in the sense in which, in the space of 5 weeks, we've had 26 million Americans sign on for unemployment insurance. States like Michigan have seen a surge to what looks, on paper at least, like 25% unemployment in a single month. And on the other hand, as you're saying, really from the 23rd of March onwards, which is when the rally begins, the financial markets have been bobbing back, if not to their pre-crisis levels, then at least to much more buoyant levels. And what I think the difference maker here is definitely the Fed, which really from the beginning of March has been injecting more liquidity, more loans into the financial markets than ever before. So it's a very, very peculiar balance that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I mean, it seems so. I keep likening it to a moment where like you bump into something and you're in a state of shock before, and you're suspended there for a moment and there's no reaction because you're still in a state of shock. I mean, is that what's going on? Or is it that because the financial markets have been basically propped up, that nobody who usually cares about these things or ostensibly cares about these things are concerned? Like I'm having a real trouble wrapping my head around it. I mean, it would be hard to wrap my head around it if the stock market was also falling, right? I mean, but at least there would be some sort of like semblance of parity here. But we're going through something that is unprecedented, right?
Yeah, I do. I like your image. It's a bit of that, other cartoon images come to mind, like the Wile E. Coyote or something like that. That sense of having gone off the cliff, and there's that moment when the character is suspended in midair by nothing other than the spinning of their feet or their wheels or something. And then the plunge comes. And the question, of course, is when does that moment of plunge come? I mean, one way of making sense of this is that it's happening to different groups of people. I mean, one of the effects of the shock is, after all, to sort of divide us very starkly between those of us who have the privilege of being able to work from home. I work from home normally most of the time anyway. My life has been very little impacted by this. And I work for an employer with a big, deep endowment. Nothing is changing about my life very much other than my daughter's at home, so on and so forth, right? So it's personal circumstances. So my life continues onwards, and it's people who are in that fortunate position who, after all, are the people who own most of the equity in America's stock markets. And at the other hand, at the other end of the scale are the folks who work in the shops and the bodegas and the little restaurants that run up and down Broadway that I can see from outside my window. And they are locked away in small apartments in Queens, which is also where in New York City most of the infection is happening. And their reality is starkly different from mine. And the two don't really intersect in a direct way. I mean, I think as this goes on, we are going to be seeing not just middle class in the American sense, but upper middle class Americans losing their jobs, because this is going to become a comprehensive economic crisis. But the rate it's moving at right now is that the folks who've been laid off first are those at the bottom end of the labour market and those who are most vulnerable. And it's only really when this sort of seeps through to the entire economy that we're going to be, I think, seeing a more comprehensive Sure, but I'm in the same state of bewilderment as you. You would expect an economy in this kind of paralysis to look different. I think part of the problem is that we can't, certainly in a city like in Manhattan, you can't go outside. So I mean, I've only seen Manhattan like 3 blocks from the circumference from my apartment now for almost 2 months. So I don't know what downtown looks like, which is normally a bustling commercial hub, one of the great bustling commercial centers of the entire world, and it's a ghost town by all accounts. And I think when you see that and you think about all of the shop staff, the sales assistants, the warehouse people who are associated with that you begin to realize the depth of what we're facing here.
I want to just, because I think the last time you were on the program, we talked about your book Crashed, how a decade of financial crises had changed the world. I mean, just so that people can grasp what is different between what happened in the fall, really, of 2008, I guess it was, and now, like, I mean, because we do have that split. Like at one point, I think obviously, and we should talk about. We'll talk about this in a moment. Like, I mean, it has to. I'm in the a similar boat. I'm at home. I'm working. I got to deal with my kids, but in terms of from an economic standpoint, there's no, I don't, maybe a little bit of advertising revenue, but there isn't been the shock that I know is going on. And in the financial crisis, it was different because you had the stock market plummet. It didn't go back up. You also had sort of like a building, or maybe that's the wrong word, a degrading real estate market that just at one point like was sort of slowly degrading and then fell off a cliff, which would impact a wider range of people. I mean, are we sort of like, is this thing headed in sort of the opposite direction in terms of how things are happening?
No, I think we have to come back to the point that this is potentially much worse than 2007-8. In the end, in 2007-8, after all, it was that one sector, it was construction and real estate, that blew up a huge bubble supported by this extraordinary globalized system of real estate finance. The European banks were in on it as well. And when that began to unravel on both sides of the Atlantic, in the US, in Ireland, in Spain, the entire financial system came crashing down, and it's that which took the rest of the economy with it. This time round, it's really a full body check. The entire economy has shuddered to a standstill, right? The turmoil in the financial markets in March was really the anticipation, because that's what financial markets do, of this full body check. The entire economy is going to stop, right? Detroit will stop, but also all of the retail, all of the restaurants, all of the travel business, it will all stop. I mean, my wife is a tour operator, and her business is basically non-existent for the rest of this year. We're not feeling this as acutely as we would, because I've got a steady job with my university. But everyone that she works with across the entire world is basically breadless for the rest of this year, and they don't even know when it's coming back. They don't know when flights are going to resume. They don't know when hotels will operate. Glamorous hotels in the tourist centres of all of Europe have just shut their doors, and it's not clear when they ever reopen. Now, what that then causes all of those people to do, and they're only just in the process of doing it because this is only 3 or 4 weeks old, is they reevaluate all of their spending decisions. They themselves will not be going on holiday anytime soon. No one's buying a car. No one's buying a new computer. No one's upgrading their cell phone right now. So this will begin to ripple through the entire economy, and it's simply too soon. I mean, we've never had a shock as comprehensive as this delivered with this kind of intensity this quickly. So the numbers are only just beginning to catch up. The statistics don't add up. We know that, for instance, delinquency on consumer loans, car loans and stuff is incredibly closely correlated with unemployment numbers in the US. But the unemployment numbers have leapt from record lows to record highs in the space of 5 weeks. So it's going to be a while before those credit card delinquencies and auto loan delinquencies begin to pile up. When they do, that inflicts losses on the balance sheets of the banks. And we may 6 months to 12 months from now be dealing with very serious tension within the financial system. Remember, the real estate bust didn't start with Lehman in 2008 in September. It started really in the spring of 2007. So if we're on that kind of a clock, we could still be dealing with the financial fallout from this now deep inside the balance sheets of the mortgage lenders and the banks. Next spring, right. Spring 2021 would not be an unreasonable moment to be expecting some of that to be coming down the pipe.
All right, I want to get to that in a moment, because there's a question of, is there the same? I know, and I don't think there needs to be for the devastation to be the same. But is there the same sort of like vulnerability in those financial markets that there were in 2007, which ultimately led to sort of like an exponential impact? But so what we're looking at is we just had the earthquake, and it was, you know, in the middle of the Pacific, and then the tsunami comes.
Yeah.
And so do we have like, is there, I mean, how do we assess that, and what will hit first? Like,
I think that's a great analogy. That's really a great analogy. We do indeed have the earthquake. We then have the tsunami, and then you've really got to hope that no one's built a nuclear reactor in the path of the tsunami, which is what happened with Japan, right, with Fukushima. That's really our question. It's like, which bits of the shoreline is this going to hit? And then when it hits, which pieces of fragile, potentially deadly economic and financial infrastructure in harm's way as that shock comes on shore? And that's what we're going to be probing all the way around the world, because another thing that's really unique about this is it's not just the tsunami in the Pacific. It's as though the entire globe had quaked. I mean, it's quite even difficult to envision this, but that's essentially what's happened to humanity, right? 81% of the workforce, not of one country, but of the entire world, is operating under various types of lockdown or immediate post-lockdown right now. The ILO, the Global Labour Organization, says it's 2.7 billion people. I mean, it's unprecedented. So we don't know what it's like when everyone in the world simultaneously suffers this kind of a shock. Some people like you and me go on operating as normal, but people in my wife's business and people that she works with all over the world, but also streetwalkers in Delhi, people operating little grocery stores in Lagos in Nigeria, they've all simultaneously been hit. And we don't know how this organism reacts when you try and come back from that kind of a shock. Because normally we rely on the stronger bits pulling the weaker bits out and so on. Right now, it's not clear whether any bit of the global economy has basically retained its dynamism and that can pull us ashore from here. So it's really, it's extraordinarily dramatic in that sense, in its comprehensiveness. And the way it's affected literally every sector, every economy in the world simultaneously.
Okay, so we having established the sort of the scope of what we're looking at, let's just, I mean, just to sort of tease this out in terms of like the depth in which it hits. Let's just pretend in a parallel universe that in a week, the scientists come out and say, like, this is really strange, but Donald Trump was right. It just, as soon as we got into the first week of May, the heat came and the whole thing disappeared. Everybody can go back out today, on May 15th, and we're fine. So, pick up the pieces and get back to work. I mean, presumably, if that happened, right, there'd be like a bit of there'd be some I don't know, some stuff to work out through the system, but more or less we would be fine, right? If that's the case, it will. All right.
Unless you're one of the 26 million people who've lost their job already, so they would all they'd have to go back to the businesses that laid them off, and they'd have to hope. And that is what the data shows, that currently the vast majority of those layoffs are temporary. So
right.
it implies the businesses that the people were laid off by are still there. The question really is, 2 or 3 months from now, will those businesses still be there, or will they be bankrupt? Will they have been wiped out in the meantime? If those people can go back to those businesses intact, then indeed, yes, one could imagine what the economists call a V-shaped recovery coming out of this. But it's really a matter of time. If this lasts into the summer, the lockdowns in the key economic centers of the US, and crucially, not only if the lockdowns are lifted, but if consumer and investor confidence doesn't return, because it's all very well for the governor to say it's all right for you to go out now, but we actually have to believe it's all right and that we're willing to take the risk that's involved in going out and inflict that risk on all our families, all the stuff that we now fully understand, right? We'll still not be going out and spending money the way we used to in restaurants. We still won't be going out to the malls because we'll have gotten used to getting things delivered and whatnot. So that shock will persist. And the time factor, I think, is absolutely crucial, and also the credibility of the return. If we're skeptical about how safe we actually are, if we're skeptical about the ability of the medical system to cope if we do get ill. And especially if we're hit by a second or third wave of our viral infection, then this changes confidence, and that changes, it may feel sort of a flimsy sort of argument, but there is nothing worse for an economy than a comprehensive loss of confidence on the part of consumers and investors. And you can see that, we'll be able to pick it up statistically in the way in which consumer behavior changes. So if consumption goes down, if saving goes up, sounds like a good thing to do from the point of view of an individual household, and it may very well be. It's a safe thing to do, allows you to build wealth. But if that happens collectively across the entire economy, that doesn't work out, because what that will do is cut demand and send us into a downward spiral. And the real worry is that those forces of recession, if you like, might take over.
So, okay. And so, just in my little scenario, we get that V-shaped economy, but then we know that there is a date, and we don't know exactly how long it is, and that's and whether it's 2 months or 3 months or 4 months, when those jobs just go away because those firms close down. That's really a function of how much money, how much aid, essentially, Congress decides to pump in there. And
that's why credit is so crucial. Yeah, that's why credit is. We're all living on credit right now, and we need the financial system to remain intact to be able to provide that. And that's why the interventions by the Fed were so critical in March. I mean, again, you're ending up lending money to people who are rich and everything else. But what that enables you to do is to sustain the credit system, because as you're saying, we need that to get us through.
Well, and I want to
really need. Yeah.
I want to talk about the disparity too of lending. I mean, obviously, we need to lend. And we lent to basically wealthy people and wealthy institutions that can lend credit to other people. But by doing so, what we're also doing is increasing wealth inequality. We could have theoretically provided this credit essentially to everybody else, which would have been in the form of far more generous, let's say, unemployment insurance or direct payments, or even things like congratulations, you're now on free healthcare. I mean, all of those are in some form essentially providing credit that we can basically relieve, can basically say, we're going to forgive that debt, incidentally, 6 months down the road. But that credit that that the government essentially provided for people is basically just keeping everybody in sort of this sort of stasis, and paying everybody to just sort of protect society in some fashion. And at this point, we've only provided credit for one segment of the economy, and one which ultimately, like, that's going to run out at one point too. So, I mean, do we have a sense of where we'll start to see this first, assuming no more money? Like, what generally in the economy where you would have where consumer spending starts to dry up? We're seeing it obviously with like small businesses, right? And restaurants and whatnot, because they don't have the capital to maintain that stasis. Where
they've got bills to pay, rent bills to pay, and they're in real trouble. I think we're going to see it above all in the sectors that were vulnerable anyway. Before this crisis hit, we spent a lot of time talking about the increasing inequality, not just in American society between higher and lower income households, but also in the business sector, between the superstar firms, if you like, and those that were just getting by. And there's a huge part of the US economy, like every other advanced economy, that really is just getting by. Most of the profits in business as a whole are made in that superstar group that dominates the S&P 500. Everyone else is just kind of, really hanging on. And a shock like this tips those companies over the edge. And the sort of places that you're really going to see it is the famous, the long-awaited collapse of certain sorts of retail model, which I think probably are going to get the coup de grace in this crisis. Even on Broadway, where I live, if you walk up and down, you've got an Urban Outfitters, for instance, a sort of classic victim of this process, which announced early on in the lockdown, the 23rd of March was their last day that they were going to be open. That outlet is shut, and everyone who works there has probably lost their job forever. So those are the sorts of sectors where I think we're really going to see this, where we're going to see the permanent damage being done. Those are sectors which have been traditionally employers of a lot of women, female workers, middling levels of education. They've been one of the places that middle-class American families have gone to sustain themselves, as the classic blue-collar male jobs have gone away. And those jobs now, the jobs done by women, are also in considerable risk. So those are the sorts of sectors where I'd look to see the damage.
I mean, it's almost, I guess, to extend that metaphor with the tsunami, these are the sort of the low-lying flats near the beach, essentially, and then the higher ground are these big, massive mega firms that essentially.
And they come out of this stronger. I think their competition gets wiped out. Relatively speaking, they come out of this stronger. And as you're saying, but almost by default, you know, if you take a society characterized by large inequality and then you put it through a crisis like this and you try and rescue it, the people that swim ashore, the people that are able to take advantage of the government support, even if the government is in fact in its own way trying to counter-steer against this, tend to be those with the best connections, with the best banking connections, with the best lawyers, accountants, and so on. And they get their noses in the trough first. And so it's not surprising. I think the latest figure I saw was that only 5% of American small businesses have seen any payout yet from the the payroll protection plan.
Right. Well, there's not going to be. I mean, there's simply there. I mean, there was simply not enough money, but B, it went to, like you said, if you have like concierge service at your bank because you're a big client, you're going to get in there first, and that's it. And because the banks themselves are determining who they're going to send to the, they're determining the order of the applications they're going to send to the SBA.
Absolutely. And I think the banks felt incredibly uncomfortable about it. Like, banks under normal circumstances do a lot of kind of quasi law and order type of, money laundering enforcement, all that kind of stuff. We're all familiar with the paperwork that's associated with that. Now, all of a sudden, as you say, they found themselves in this process of doing a kind of selection of the companies. That was built into the legislation that the banks are going to have that job. I mean, they'll receive fees for it, but nevertheless, it's
apparently they got paid fairly handsomely. But the problem is that they're conflicted in terms of who they're going to put first in line, because they obviously want to put their better clients in first in line because they want to make sure that those clients stick around.
Absolutely. And that is the brutal logic of this kind of process, right? I mean, we end up supporting the big players because the big players also employ a lot of people and they matter to the welfare of the American economy. It's a kind of triage, right? That's operating at the level of the economic system. And it cuts against the desire to be egalitarian. It cuts against the desire to preserve the little guy, who at that moment just doesn't have the same systemic importance as propping up a really big employer. We might all want to come down hard on the airlines because they treat their customers so shabbily, and we know what they've been doing with their profits over the years. On the other hand, they're really large employers. They're crucial to the regional economy to many parts of the US. And after all, when this is all done with, we're going to have to fly again. So, the impulse to regulate and to discipline an actor that has basically been, all study after study has shown, taking advantage of an oligopolistic position to squeeze advantage for themselves. At this moment of crisis, it doesn't seem like the right moment to, just pragmatically, it doesn't appear to be the right moment to put the screws on.
Well, I mean, let me just push back on that just a little bit as we move into sort of like the second phase of this. And as we talk about sort of the I guess the water, starting to like pour onto the beach and into the low level ground. It almost seems like, premature, but how we respond to what we do now is sort of built into how we respond now, right? I mean, so like we use the airlines as an example. On one hand, we're talking about how crucial they are. I mean, they're too big to fail, right? I mean, that is the argument essentially. And, but at that point, like, one of the responses could be, hey, we just discovered something that's too big to fail. That's a job for government to do. Like, we're now going to have part of what you have because you have shown that we have established that this service, airlines, in 2008, it could have been banks, are crucial to the functioning of society. However, you have not been the proper steward for this service to society because you sucked, so much money out of your business to essentially line your pockets with buybacks and whatnot. We could have made the same argument about the Boeing 737 Max. Folks know that story about how that was like, instead of putting it onto R&D and redeveloping that plane, they came up with this sort of big Band-Aid that sometimes slips off. We could at that point as a society say, like, we're going to have to own part of this because you have shown an inability to steward this, what we consider so crucial to our society, that we're willing to bail it out, this service.
I don't disagree. I mean, my personal favorite right now is the fossil fuel industry, in which I believe we could buy a controlling stake. The entire fossil fuel industry of the world, given the depressed price of oil and gas. And at this point, a couple of $100 billion puts you in a, which, in terms of the money that we've been throwing around here is peanuts, would give you an absolutely dominant shareholding position in all of the major oil and gas companies of the Western world at this moment. And from the point of view of addressing the climate crisis, which is clearly, the great crisis that we thought was going to dominate the headlines of this year, that would totally change the game. So the force of that, I think, is extremely compelling. There are two questions, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here, just for the sake of argument, that push back against that. The first is simply, in the crisis, is your priority to, as it were, save what can be saved or to pursue transformation? And what is the price of pursuing a transformational agenda at this moment? Would you damage confidence even further? Would you have a larger investor strike if you were seen to be playing rough at this moment? And that, I think, is one of the concerns. And the second, of course, is that this is all entirely hypothetical, because the people in power in Washington, D.C. right now are stone cold Republicans, and they have no interest whatsoever in pursuing this kind of argument. So it's a hypothetical. And one really needs to be asking oneself, how do you build a political coalition to push through this kind of transformational agenda at this moment? And is this crisis going to get us there? And after all, one of the kind of remarkable things of this moment is that the Sanders campaign folded, and it folded virtually without, without noise. It was almost the sort of just accompanying music in a scene that was entirely dominated by the urgencies of the crisis. That fundamental, a transformation, therefore, in the political complexion of the United States going forward into next year, because the choices are now between Biden and Trump, happened, without very little drama. And yet that, of course, decides the possibility of any of the sort of transformational politics that you and I might like, or that one might think of as being appropriate in this crisis.
Let me, I will certainly concede and knowing that you're playing a devil's advocate here, I'll certainly concede number two. Number one, I guess I would argue, is just that we're going through transformational politics, whether we like it or not. It's just a question of who gets to, who's in charge of what the transformation looks like, in my mind. And it does definitely feel like, there's really one side in this. One side is like, we're going to make it a completely dominated by a couple of firms. And the other side is saying, it appears like you're going to make it completely dominant. I mean, there does not seem to be two sides to the argument here, as we see now. And at one point in your piece, you're talking about central banks can continue to sort of pump money into the economy. And you write, to the conventional mind, debt must be eventually repaid through surpluses generated through tax increases or spending cuts. In other words, and I feel like we're still so in the midst of, like, we're still riding on one of those waves of that tsunami that we can't really assess the damage yet. But what you're suggesting is that what tends to follow these things, and certainly in Europe in 2008, 9, 10, it did more so than in the United States, but still to a certain extent, there was a pivot to it in 2010 in the United States, is austerity. And McConnell's already trying to impose that on the states at this point. If one did not have a conventional mind, what would be the other options? Like, what could we be setting up now so that we would not, or at least building a narrative now so that we would not have to deal with austerity, which was, I think, an unequivocal failure in Europe. I mean, we could still see the social and political implications of it, if not economic, in Europe.
And in the United States as well. And I think you're absolutely right to bring up the issue of the state level politics here, because if you look at the response to the 08-09 crisis in the US, everything the federal government did was largely offset by the tightening at the state level, the city level, where we saw savage cuts in many states for spending on essentials like education. This is really where the crisis of public education in so many of the red states of the United States begins, is in the squeeze that followed 08-09. And folks like McConnell directly complicit in this. And they were complicit also, in the terms of austerity in 2010, because that's not, the Obama administration included a lot of Clinton veterans who were quite hard on the deficit, but they were driven in that direction by just the blanket Stonewall resistance of the GOP in Congress that McConnell was the leader of. Right? He said he wanted Obama to be a one-term president. That was his main mission in politics. So absolutely, I think this is really a crucial issue. Is not in the first instance, in the crisis itself, but especially when you've got a Republican president. Then, of course, and it's an election year, then the taps are full on. But if Joe Biden wins in November, expect the entire conservative political machine, along with its media, to pivot on a dime, and from then on in, it'll be deficits and debt as the central issue that's threatening the United States. For people of a different political persuasion, my basic advice is just don't talk about debt. And that's not a counsel of irresponsibility. Don't talk about debt. Debt doesn't have to be an issue. It doesn't have to be an issue for two basic reasons, or three really. It doesn't have to be an issue for the United States because the United States is the issuer of the dominant currency in the world. Everyone in the world wants dollars and can use dollars. This crisis has only reaffirmed that. America is not going to be subject to the blackmail of foreign creditors. America is not in the position of a household when it borrows. It is the ultimate global sovereign debtor, if you like. So America is not constrained in the way that an Argentina is, for instance. That's the first issue. Secondly, right now, it's incredibly cheap to borrow because interest rates are low. So even if the debt numbers are huge, the interest rate that the Americans pay on this is derisory. So it's really a small price to pay for investments that are essential right now to sustain life in the US, get normal life back to normal, and ideally, of course, begin that process of transformation. Because I like the point you made earlier on, that really this is about transformation, and the question is, what direction does this go in? And the third reason is that once again, we've demonstrated the basic truth in this crisis, as we did in 08-09, which is that public debt is different, because public debt is an asset which is used by everyone for the purposes of long-term investing, for safe investing, and is managed by and has a prime claim on the attention of the Federal Reserve, the central bank. And ultimately, debt which is owed by the federal government but held by the central bank is quite literally debt that we owe to ourselves, money that we owe to ourselves. And to the extent that we owe it to ourselves, it's essentially might as well not be a matter of concern, because it shows up on both sides of our public balance sheet. It shows up as a debit on one side of the federal government, but as a credit on the balance sheet of the central bank. So it's just not something that we need to be concerned about. There is a flip side to that, which is the central bank money issued by the central bank in exchange for the debt that it buys. But that, and that could, under certain circumstances, trigger inflation. But we are a million miles away from a world in which inflation of that type is going to happen. So for all of those reasons, we should just not be worrying about debt. We should really not even be, if we can possibly be, engaging on the terrain of debt politics. Because anyone who raises that at this point is really raising a red herring, and you've got to ask why they're doing that.
Well, they're doing it because they want to, I guess the analogy I've been using in terms of that first stimulus was that, everybody's under the yellow flag except for a narrow set of wealthy elite. And when they get that money, they're zooming around the racetrack, and they want to maintain that dynamic, essentially. And that's where talk of debt comes in. We need, the austerity is for everybody else, essentially.
Well, it's for those who are dependent on, quote unquote entitlements, for instance, or at the state level, at the local level, the people who are reliant on public schooling or the public infrastructure rather than private schools, and could afford to look after themselves through those kind of mechanisms. So So indeed, yes, the debt is really a kind of albatross that you hang around the neck of the public sector. And I basically suspect anyone of bad faith who even raises the issue. That's what I was trying to get at with this notion of like the conventional mind, which I take to be basically a conservative position that misunderstands the nature of government debt and treats it as analogous to that of a private household, which is basically just a false analogy. It's misleading, and its politics are profoundly conservative.
So in the event that we are in a position where, you know, the only response, I mean, it does feel like on some level that the way that we get to non-austerity policies is to drive up that debt so large that it's just an impossible task to sort of like refill those coffers and just force almost, you know, whoever's in power on the other side of this I mean, you know, again, to go back to that analogy, the water comes in, at one point it recedes, and then you're just sitting there in the wreckage. We're still in the process of the water, like it hasn't even hit the beach yet on some level. And so we don't even know how far inland it's going to go. But when we get to the other side where we are surveying the wreckage after the water has receded, on some level, it sounds like we need to have so much debt that the only answer is to just look at those, basically those accounting, those spreadsheets, and just go, we're just going to zero balance it across the, you know, on this ledger and that ledger.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk Turkey here. I mean, what the Democrats should not do is submit to the blackmail which they've submitted to twice already, which was that the Reagan deficits were run up as a combination of military spending and tax cuts, were then worked down by the Clinton administration, which submitted to the blackmail of responsibility in fiscal policy and made it its job to cut the deficits. And then the Bush deficits, again, run up due to wars of choice on the one hand, and huge tax cuts in the middle of those wars of choice became the legacy of the Obama administration. And the Obama administration, forced its hand in part by the non-cooperation of the Republicans, made it its job to stabilize the budget again. And so this is a completely one-sided political game in which, as it were, the Democrats are responsible for restoring, quote unquote, the fiscal credibility of the United States, and the Republicans use the capital stored up in that process then to line the nests of their voters who are in favor of both high spending on the one hand, especially on the military, and tax cuts on the other. And no incoming Democratic administration should submit to that blackmail again. And the answer to that is indeed, as you say, simply to call their bluff and to say, look, we can run deficits too. These are our priorities as opposed to your priorities. Our priorities don't include tax cuts for the rich, and they don't include massive military spending. They do include high spending on infrastructure. We would talk about taxes, but we will want to concentrate them progressively on those of higher income and wealth. And we will run whatever deficit is necessary to achieve our objectives of full employment and sustainable transformation of the American economy. And then we'll figure out how we deal with the debt afterwards, right? And anyone who tries to argue from the Republican side at this point about debt, it just needs to have their bluff called, because a look at the track record of the last, not the last 10 years, but the last 40 years, all the way back to the 1980s. So yes, indeed, but this is a message, of course, that has to be driven home to Biden and the team of advisors around Biden, because they are the Democratic hope now. And we know that, broadly speaking, Biden is a completely conventional centrist Democrat, and folks like Larry Summers are amongst those advising him. And they have been part, 2 times over, of consolidation efforts within the American budget under Democratic administrations. And it would really be a historic tragedy if a Biden administration was to renew that agenda, because it just simply hands the game to the Republicans every time. I'd be remiss if I also didn't point out that Nancy Pelosi is of that ilk. I mean, she, a Pete Peterson acolyte, she was talking about if we take back the House, we're going to install PAYGO, which basically means that we cannot deficit spend. I mean, she's. I mean, Barack Obama himself, would talk about belt tightening.
Yes.
I mean, it's bad economics and it's worse politics, and it's disabling. And it's part historically of the deal that was done between the Clinton team and Rubin from Goldman Sachs in the 1990s. We know exactly what the trap was. We know what its political advantages were. Certain sorts of risks went away. You made peace with Alan Greenspan. You made peace with Wall Street. It was good for the coffers of certain sorts of elite Democrats in terms of campaign funds and so on. It put them in contention to compete head on head with the Republicans in terms of money raising. But in terms of actually progressive politics, especially given the pressures of rising inequality, a real catastrophe for certain segments of American society, it's been devastating for the credibility of the Democrats amongst that kind of electorate.
All right. So lastly, let me ask you this. I mean, I know this is almost an impossible task because we still, I think, don't have a clear picture of what we're dealing with. But if you were to be in a position where I don't know how this would work out, but Joe Biden would come to you and say, like, listen, Adam, I'm giving you one thing off your wish list. What's the most important thing that I will do? And I will do it after I assume dictatorial powers on January 21st. What would be the one program that you think would have the most sort of like, a broad program that have the most impact in terms of dealing what we can only anticipate we're going to be dealing with in 6 months, 10 months?
I do think in the end that the Green New Deal vision is the one to go for. That had already demonstrated its ability to mobilize a large segment of the progressive coalition. It speaks directly to the needs of the United States in terms of the energy transition. It speaks to the need to create well-paid, high-quality jobs with real future prospects. And it's doable. This isn't a moonshot. Well, it is a moonshot, and the moonshot was doable. We're talking about 2, 3, 4% of GDP that needs to be mobilized, and it would have a transformative effect. And in the end, it's basically win-win. So, it reduces the amount of completely unnecessary fuel bills that we spend, on fuel bills for fossil fuels that we shouldn't be using. So that would be my number one priority, that one would inject some of the energy of the Green New Deal coalition into a Biden administration. It's a long shot in political terms,
right,
given what we know about his background, but that would be the thing that I think they ought to adopt. And I think it ought to be an easy sell. This is not something that actually is, I think it's in a sense a failure of imagination on the part of centrists like himself. When you've got folks like Bloomberg, for instance, who are really quite serious about the energy transformation agenda and quite radical in the way in which they're willing to think not just about stimulating green, but cracking down hard on brown fuels. Gas is, coal is the no-brainer, but gas, frack gas, and then oil are really those are the hard bullets that need to be bitten. And that's where I think, it would be great if they would deploy political courage. Other people will make the case for various types of universal healthcare. I think that's a absolutely legitimate call. And there are some difficult trade-offs to be argued through here, even if one imagined that a Biden administration would in fact be a genuinely progressive one. But that would be my own personal
right.
plug.
And to be clear, the Green New Deal is essentially a federal jobs program, a massive federal jobs program and federal investment program.
Well, in the AOC version, and it was my own and I see nothing wrong with that. My own would create a very large number of
I'm sorry, Adam. We're having something's happening with our audio. You're breaking up a little bit. Let's try it again. Oh, well, for some reason, we may have to actually leave it there. For some reason, we're having some type of audio. I don't know. The internet has been a little bit funky. But Adam Tooze, if you can hear me, thank you so much for your time today. Really interesting stuff. We will put a link to your piece. The Normal Economy is Never Coming Back on our website at majority.fm. Please stay safe and thank you again for joining us. All right. I'm going to assume that was you saying goodbye because we couldn't break it here.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, folks. Sorry about that. Don't know what happened, but there it is. We are just oddly in the midst of this. It is both a severe, acute crisis in a way that is unprecedented in the history of this country, and maybe the history of the world, frankly. But this is the paradox. As acute as it is right now, as a society, we can't feel it because we're, still essentially indoors. I mean, I think obviously, if you have lost your job, as millions of people have, you are acutely aware of this. But as a society, in terms of what it's done to our economy, I just don't think that we have the ability to recognize it yet. It's almost like, a tornado is hit in the middle of the night, and you look out your window and it's just dark. You can't tell what's going on, and I don't know when, in that metaphor, the morning comes and we look out and survey the damage. But we are still in the midst of that tornado essentially raging in the middle of the night. And it is, I think the important thing for folks to do is to be mindful and to continue to push for policies that, because the decisions that are made now will implicate how we build back later. And so we need to be conscious of that. And I say that on a day where it's announced that the House is still, and it's enraging to me, not coming back to do their effing job. And I don't care if you need to commandeer a hotel and quarantine Congress people and have a shuttle bus that takes them and test every one of them as they get into the hotel, make sure they're fine, and then shuttle them to the House. But this is just absurd. The idea that our lawmakers 6 weeks in are still not as important to what's going on in our society as the folks we make work at the supermarket. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. We will talk more about this in a moment. I think Namaki should be joining us shortly. I don't know if she has the.
She's in the waiting room. Actually.
Oh, she is. Yeah, bring her in. She can talk about what she's talking about on her show. And as Matt does that, I will remind you this program relies on its support from its members to keep on trucking. Every day we do our best to bring you some interesting interviews if we can, or discussion of the news, and maintain our technology. It's always something. But if you have the ability to support the program, join themajorityreport.com. If you do not have the ability to support the program, but you still want access to the fun half, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. If you've been a member and you're worried about it going forward, head over back to your membership page. We got some options for you there as you attempt to cancel. So check that out. Also, don't forget, this is not Just Coffee branded, but it is, that's the way I'm drinking my coffee now, by the, I go through a thing of those basically a day. There you go. Nomi's got hers as well.
Just right.
Justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. Oh, also, I should tell you, the AM Quickie, I think we're going to move it over to our second Majority Report channel. That is Majority Report audio on YouTube. But you can still get it via a podcast, of course, at amquickie.com. So check that out. 6-7 minutes of headline news every day. Don't forget TMBS tonight. You can check it out at patreon.com/TMBS or youtube.com, The Michael Brooks Show. Also, the Antifada. Find Jamie doing the show at patreon.com/The Antifada, or I think that's it. And Nomiki.
Hi.
What is what's happening on your show?
What's happening on my show? Well, we are still talking about, because there was just so much to discuss, where we go from here. This week's show, specifically, I discuss what's going to happen with down ballot races, challengers, grassroots challengers, and why it's super important that it's all hands on deck. And if we want to concentrate our energy towards something super productive, it would definitely be down ballot races, because the big moneyed interests have, they have the ability to buy ads and more digital in the era of COVID, and our power as a movement is knocking on doors. So that's a big part of the next show. We also have Micah Utrecht, which, we actually planned the interview far back, and he has his book out with Megan Day from Jacobin, both of them from Jacobin, called Bigger Than Bernie. And Harvey K comes on because, we always have to check in with Harvey K, as you know too well.
Well, I mean, if there's
Good
any
timing.
template for what needs to happen with the government, it is, FDR provided it for
Absolutely.
us. And we need, we're going to need a lot of that and more. Matt, what's happening on Literary Hangover?
Over at twitch.tv/literary hangover last night, I played Half-Life 2 while listening to 1984 by George Orwell. So it's a really good mix. I think people were kind of blown away by the ingenuity of combining those two things. So check that out. Go subscribe. Twitch.tv/literary hangover.
Who did the voiceover for 1984?
It's some volunteer guy somehow. It's on YouTube, actually. Yeah. I don't know how it's copyright safe, but it was on Toad. Check that out while it lasts, I guess.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. Headed to the fun half. 646-257-3920 is the number.
It's so funny.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
Bring up their buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's a good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2, 5 8s, 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance.
Ooh.
Grandpa. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to the repertoire. All I have is the dip in this world.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
It's under $1 million a year. You're not paying.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. Let's take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam, hey, Andy, you guys ready to do evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
You think I messed up?
Agree.
No.
death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way. Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh. Wow.
Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
here I am. So, Nomi, before we start on, because we have a lot of things to talk about. Obviously, the cancellation of the presidential primary in New York, which was unfortunately announced on the same day that some new information about, or I should say some corroborating information was reported about the Tara Reade allegations against Joe Biden, which I think we'll talk about why these are resonating so much. But before we get there, after having just gone through what we went through in terms of that conversation about what we're headed towards in terms of the economy, I want to do something that is hopefully going to be a little bit inspirational. Okay, this is going to be clip number 12. There's a lot of folks out there who need inspiration, and who better to provide that inspiration than the longtime Donald Trump supporter, the good friend of Sean Hannity, the maker, the inventor of My Pillow, Mike Lindell, who is now airing an ad for his own personal memoir. I mean, how, like, already, I'm just looking at the screen grab and I'm already feeling completely inspired. Here is Mike Lindell.
It's my favorite.
Talking about this, his piece here. I wonder if that's actually his home, but go ahead.
I'm Mike Lindell. You know me as the My Pillow guy, but what you might not know is my story. I've spent years writing my memoir, and it's finally done. Before this terrible pandemic came upon us, I had already wrote, I dedicate this book to anyone looking for hope. Well, right now, we're all looking for hope. And I've always used mathematics to prove that God exists. In our lives, we've had things happen that are 1 in a million or 1 in a billion, or we might say that's impossible. Well, when do we say it all has to be a miracle? My life has been like living inside of a movie, and in my book, I have pictures that are going to validate everything that you're going to read. I believe that my story is going to bring inspiration and hope to everyone. By the time you're done reading my book, you will believe that with God, all things are possible.
Mike spent the last Hold on. Pause it for 1 second. No, wait a second. Isn't the idea that this is like 1 in a million or 1 in a billion? I mean, if it's 1 in a billion, that would mean that on our planet, what we have, how many billion people? Like now 5 or 6?
Closer to 7, I think.
7 billion.
Yeah.
So that would mean that there's 7 of those. If it's genuinely, mathematically speaking, 1 in a billion. But if it's 1 in a million, I mean, we're talking about like there'll be what, 700 more, right? I mean, so
Mathematically speaking.
Yeah, mathematically speaking. Did I just disprove the existence of God? I'm not sure.
He also said anything is possible. So if anything is possible for everyone, then everyone has the ability to have an enterprise like his enterprise.
All right. Well, that's good to know. Back up just a little bit. I don't want to miss this part about him writing. And there's pictures in it, incidentally, to prove all of it.
This is too much. This is too.
By the time you're done reading my book, you will believe that with God, all things are possible.
Mike spent the last 7 years writing his book to share his life story. In this difficult time we are in, Mike's book will bring much needed inspiration and hope to everyone who reads it.
Did he handwrite the whole book?
Oh my God.
It appears that he did. All right. Fair enough. That's like 1 in, like, I don't know, like maybe 1 in like 200. I would say, would write the whole book. Go ahead. Handwrite.
But now the game was over. The house had won. I was going to die right here on this deserted street. A small item in the news. American tourist goes missing in Mexico.
Call now or visit mypillow.com to purchase What Are the Odds from Crack Addict to CEO. Enter the promo code and you'll receive free shipping. Mike will also include a free $25 MyPillow gift card. Mike shares his incredible story of addiction, divine intervention, and hope. In his new memoir, What Are the Odds? From Crack Addict to CEO, learn how Mike's 14 near-death experiences and heavy crack addiction led him from a place of total darkness into the light. Mike's personal stories of transformation remind us that with faith, all things are possible. Call now or visit mypillow.com to purchase What Are the Odds? From Crack Addict to CEO. Enter the promo code and you'll receive free shipping. Mike will also
I can't get past the idea that like, that for Mike Lindell, he's at the highest, he's attained the highest level of our, like he has, access to Trump. Back in I remember the debates in Vegas, he was traveling with the Trump family at the time. And all the guys that he surrounds himself with were, trying to, we're obsessed at the idea that Barack Obama had admitted that he had tried cocaine or something like that, I think in his memoir. Right. And they never said, like, can you imagine? Here's a guy who tried cocaine and now he's president, as opposed to this guy who apparently had 14 near-death experiences.
Well, Barack Obama's tagline should have been "From crack addict to presidential nominee." Maybe,
or just from like I tried cocaine, or from like what was the what was the gang that he hang out, the Shooby gang or something like that?
Choom gang.
Choom gang to president. Imagine if he had that memoir. Like they would just be dining on that forever.
Choom gang, depressed gang.
My God. But that was inspiring.
What I really like the cover. I feel like he did that in Photoshop yesterday, maybe. It's pretty. I actually want to read it now.
The cover might be holographic.
$25 off of My Pillow if you buy that book.
$25.
That's the way I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do my memoir. Is that you're gonna get like a 2 months free of the majority.
But you know this is gonna work. That's the crazy part.
Without a doubt, the guy's gonna make $1 million off that book.
This is his campaign book, probably.
Exactly. Right. Oh yeah, he's gonna run for Senate, right?
Governor. In Minnesota.
Let's go to the phones briefly. Calling from a 773 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This be Uchiwali, man.
Uchiwali, how are you?
Been a long time.
It's been a long time. You safe?
Yeah, I'm here in Manhattan now. I'm over in Hell's Kitchen. It's a minor inconvenience for me at most because I can work from home.
Glad to hear it. What's on your mind?
I was interested in that Diamond and Silk clip you played and wondering why you played it.
Why did we play it?
Yeah.
Well, because, they were let go from Fox Nation. And
yeah, but that was the news story. But why that particular clip? Because I think you need to do a better job of considering the ramifications of playing that stuff and what it might do to your audience. Because now I'm ashamed to be black.
Oh, well, I'm sorry about that. I don't think that was their clip was a statement of their blackness. I think it was just they're really, really excited about meat and thought the best way for them to communicate that was through a beatbox style rap song.
Yeah, but I'm like one or two more depressing things away from killing myself now, just because I saw that clip.
Oh, well then I want to apologize.
I'm not serious.
I know.
The reason I actually called in is, I wanted to make that comment is I'm concerned about the conservative movement these days. I've been getting in the argument with the people in Facebook now that I went to high school with. They're very much into this thing of ending the self-quarantining we're all doing. And what I've noticed is that conservative, when you talk to people that watch Fox News, everything they say is strictly bounded by what they hear coming out of the mouths of Tucker Carlson and, Sean Hannity and the like. It's like they can't think anything off that and I hate to steal the term plantation that they put themselves on. They're just not capable of imagining anything out of what they hear Tucker Carlson saying every night.
I mean, look, you know, we have data that shows when there was a disparity between Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity regarding the dangers that coronavirus presented. The Sean Hannity listeners were contracting the virus at a rate of 20% more than those who were watching Tucker Carlson at the time. And I've got to go ahead and I got a clip here. Let me play this clip. Tucker Carlson has since reversed in some way. And I think part of it is because he hasn't quite reversed. I think part of it is that he knows that, and the Republicans are quite good at this. They always need to play the opposition party, even when they're in power. And so that's why you'll get like the war on Christmas when they control every aspect of government. They have to be oppressed on some level. Otherwise, they don't have anything. It's not even
a call to action.
Yeah, it's totally. And here's Tucker Carlson now arguing that there's no scientific evidence that quarantining is relevant to flattening the curve. It's sort of a bizarre argument, but listen to this.
The San Francisco Bay Area announced it'll be extending its lockdown until the end of May. That's 5 weeks from now. What is the scientific justification for doing that? They didn't tell us because there is none. None. You may remember what they first told us back in February and March. They said, we have to take radical steps in order to, quote, flatten the curve. Well, 6 weeks later, we're happy to say that curve has been flattened, but it's likely not because of the lockdowns. The virus just isn't nearly as deadly as we thought it was. All of us, including on this show, everybody thought it was, but it turned out not to be. Hospitals never collapsed. Outside of a tiny number of places, they never came close to collapsing, at least not from an influx of infected patients.
What are they doing?
This is, I mean, he's lying and he's being somewhat illogical here. I mean, first of all, in New York, they had to add they had to
whole convention center.
They had to use the Javits Center. They used the Comfort as sort of places for non-infected folk. They had to get resources from all around the state, and they missed it by this much while we were in lockdown.
Right. While we were getting record numbers of deaths. It's not
the
Italy numbers.
The scientific evidence that is simply it is contracted by air and close proximity. And if you eliminate close proximity, then you will diminish the rate in which people are being infected. But the virus hasn't gone away. It hasn't gotten any less lethal or anything like that. It's ridiculous.
Sam, I have a little bit of a concern though, because I think I've been on obviously Tucker Carlson. I don't think you have because you're on MSNBC, but I'm a little concerned that we are spending, the left will praise Tucker a little bit too much when he acts politely. And I know that there's this whole populist thing. We want to appeal to populists on the right, but this is exactly the danger of it. I just think that he is a vehicle for destruction. I think the entire network is a vehicle for destruction at this point where we are in society, where, if we don't have some sort of movement, even if a third of the voters that didn't show up in Wisconsin decide to stay home or vote with Republicans, we might have, this entire scenario we wouldn't be in likely at this level if we had obviously Hillary Clinton. So I don't know. This is actually something that's very concerning to me when I see leftists praising Tucker Carlson for behaving like a human being, when the majority of his show is this.
To me, the analogy is I am not going to praise David Frum when he says something that is expedient in the short term, because I don't want him to have any of the benefit of credibility with people who are in my audience, because he is going to say Donald Trump is a horrible human being, and then he's going to say we got to invade Iran. And it's different issues when it comes to Tucker Carlson, but it is the same. Uchi.
Yeah, you don't want to legitimize someone who's got an entire audience suffering from cognitive capture.
Yep,
exactly.
It's true.
And my little brother's emailing me. He says to call out the chat room for confusing me with Brandon Sutton.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, sorry. Who confused you with Brandon Sutton?
The several people in the chat room say I sound like him or Robert De Niro, which I've never heard before. Can I get one more really quick thing in though?
Sure, Bobby.
I've been like you reading a little bit about cults, and one thing that really concerns me is the definition of cults varies, but one thing that all cults have in common is they teach their members that the cult itself is the only source of truth. And when you hear a conservative talk these days, especially about liberal media bias, what I'm finding is when I argue with someone and I point, here's some article from any newspaper you can name that says that Trump dropped the ball on handling this coronavirus, they just say that this is liberal bias and they ignore it.
Of course.
And it's very much that cult-like behavior, because if it wasn't cult-like behavior, what they would do is say, okay, this New York Times article you linked to, this is why this article is biased and not true. Instead of just saying it's all biased and I'm going to ignore anything I don't want to believe.
Yep. Not a new phenomenon on the right. I got to say that. Appreciate the call, Uchi.
Cult and culture share an etymological root, actually.
Thank you, Matt. Literary hangover. Let's talk about this Tara Reid thing for a moment, Nomi. This is, just from we've mentioned it in the past. The story is, there's a new element to the story. And, this is a very difficult situation. There was a piece in Business Insider. It was written by McHugh. I can't remember his first name, but he is Ronan Farrow's producer. So there is a tremendous amount of credibility that he and Farrow earned in this sort of like sector, as it were. And there has been waiting for, and look, the fact of the matter is, Katie Halper does her show, not terribly dissimilar from this one. There's a political perspective. She's not a reporter per se. Sometimes we all do some reporting and some journalism in that way. And when the allegations came out from that show, there were people who were skeptical, who wanted more reporting. Then some came from The Intercept, where talked about her relationship with the Me Too organization. I can't remember what it is, but also went and checked with the brother and a friend who supposedly Reid told contemporaneously that that Biden had assaulted her and digitally raped her. And it was not, again, I happen to think Ryan Grimm is very much a reporter first, and a sort of an opinion journalist and partisan second. But that's other people have a slightly different perspective. But McHugh is on this beat, right? And he went and he found a former neighbor of Reid's, Linda Lacasse, who is a Biden supporter. And there's a record of her supporting Biden, social media record, and said that Reid told her about the alleged assault in detail in 1995 or 96, which would have been 2 to 3 years after it happened. And she says, this happened, and I know it did because I remember talking about it. There was also a former colleague of Reid who worked at another congressional office that Reid talked to in the mid 90s of being sexually harassed by her former boss in Washington, D.C. Now, this follows the sort of phone call to, not the sort of, but the phone call to Larry King from Tara, what appears to be Tara Reid's mother, referencing something, nothing is specific. But this piece has moved it into the realm of being very, very difficult to deny that there isn't a preponderance. It's not conclusive. It can never be conclusive. But there's a lot of evidence here. There's been a lot of vetting here. And in many respects, as much as anything that certainly broadly as a society we have accepted. And it's going to be interesting to see now if that creates pressure on the Biden campaign to respond. And I mean, I don't know what happens from here. It is April. If you're going to deal with something like this, now would be the time as opposed to October. We also don't know, are there more of these?
Right. That's ultimately.
Usually in these type of situations, there are. And, you know, and we should also say this, look, people talk about the timing being suspect and this and that. The only thing I can say is this was floating around there, and timing is not necessarily a function of like reporters don't turn around and do the story in a moment, or sometimes they do. Two things could be going on here. One, the allegations could be true. Two, there could be forces that are pushing the timing in a way that benefits the Trump campaign. These things are not mutually exclusive situations.
With that being said, one thing that we've learned through Weinstein and so many of these stories that have come out, including Ronan Farrow's own account, is that there's also the opposite, which is you have internal pushback. I mean, what Tara Reid did, while yes, this story has come out at a very odd time after the primary ended and now we're in the general election, she also went to Time's Up, you know, a year ago or whatever, or she first discussed it a year ago publicly, I believe, and then went to Time's Up earlier. And Time's Up is, of course, the Me Too aligned organization, the Defense Fund, and it's being represented by Biden's chief aide, Anita Dunn, who is, you know, one of the partners at probably the most powerful political consulting firm at this point, SKD Knickerbocker. And so on the Democratic side, and they're, you know, fully intertwined into pushing back against the media. So how many reporters have been on this beat, have had tips about this, have had tips about others, and it's been either ignored, silenced, you know, because of the infrastructure of the reporting world, or just, you know, fought back against because the Democratic establishment is just so good at burying stories. I mean, I've experienced, I've tipped people off to stories, and you know, a reporter will look at it for a few weeks while it's timely. It's almost like catch and release.
Right. But
it's not. It's just they're fighting the whole time with the person being investigated, and then the story never goes anywhere. And you know, this is the on the other side, people get so desperate because they can't get it into the general public that they go to general media, that they go to the right wing, or they go to a leftist host because they just need to get it out somewhere. And
right.
I think all these things can be true at the same time.
Meanwhile, Rebecca Traister wrote a really important piece about this, that what's going to happen, and this piece is really, I think, more about sort of, at the end of the day, the sort of general dynamic that women are caught in a bind. But Biden's already said he's going to pick a woman as his VP. This woman is going to, part of their portfolio is going to be to deflect this allegation and broadly speaking, the other allegations about Joe Biden. And it is, you know, this is a real cluster, because I think, you know, you can be sensitive to this issue. You can be a feminist, you can be not a feminist, and you can come to the conclusion that like, I'm going to vote against Trump. I don't
Mm-hmm.
care who the Democratic nominee is. I think that is, it's not an irrational assessment. I mean, then you can look at this from the perspective of it's April. He has not won the majority of delegates yet. What happens at the convention? I mean, on some level, it seems to me that the only, I guess, the easiest course for Democrats on some level would be for him to drop out. Now, I want to make this clear. I don't think that means that Bernie Sanders ends up being the nominee by a long shot. I mean, Bernie Sanders has not, there is no, like, second doesn't mean anything in this.
And can I just add one thing about, I'm seeing a lot of this online, even from people who I think are tremendous. You learn this basically just by working on campaigns. Suspending a campaign does not mean, okay, the campaign's still operational, it's just like sitting there waiting. Sure, Bernie is paying people because he believes in paying people longer, and he's got the money right now. And, people have been, it's COVID.
Oh, he's paying, I think, health insurance, but I don't know if he's
insurance.
like, yeah.
Some people are assigned to, like, DNC duties or whatever. But suspend does not mean that this campaign's operational. Suspend usually means, like, I think Hillary Clinton's 2008 campaign was suspended until 2010 or whenever it was a very long period afterwards because she had debt. Usually it has to do with debt, tying things up. In my race, it was 6 months later. We had to close down our bank accounts, pay off all of our bills, etc. So that's what suspending a campaign means. It doesn't mean like it's this like half dance between being a candidate and not. And I don't think Bernie is really doing a great job explaining that, especially when it comes to his chaotic strategy for the convention, which is a whole other topic that when we talk about New York, I want to talk about. But ultimately, what you're saying, he's not the second choice. They're not going to let him be the second choice. Can we just like have an honest to God, understand what fights we're going into? Bernie's not the nominee. We hate it. I hate it personally, but there's no infrastructure in place. There's no deal making in place. There's no leverage available left for him to even go in there and say, all right, now I'm the nominee. No matter what, if Biden were swapped out, it's going to be chaotic. And I think you're right. And Rebecca Tracer's right. They're going to try to pick a woman who can soften the blow so that
as VP,
as VP. I actually was thinking about it a little bit more. Gillibrand, it might be a risk, but Gillibrand has become this force of nature when it comes to standing for Me Too. I don't think she's always taken the right choices, and sometimes she hasn't, but she specifically hasn't called out Biden, and that's something that I noticed a while back.
I suspect that she's still like sort of like feeling the heat for, people perceive what she did in calling out Al Franken prior to an ethics investigation. So there may be some like, temerity there. I mean, it's a real dilemma. And frankly, like, I don't know, I think that, I think the way for this to happen is for, Biden to say like, this is too risky. I don't think that's going to happen.
The other thing is, and this is saying the quiet thing out loud, I don't think the Democrats really care. I think that they think that the sexist, the people that they need in their minds, I'm not saying this is correct. Let me just make that very clear. Their minds, there is a group of sexist Rust Belt voters that voted for Trump last time, but also voted for Obama, and Biden's the way to win them back. And it doesn't matter if Biden has these allegations, unless Trump is just a maniacal force that can turn it into something shining on Biden that wasn't on himself. But I
I want to be clear though, when you say don't care, that you think that there's within the world of people who commentate and opine on this, that there could be a theory that like there was, there's only so much mileage to be gained at this point with saying Donald Trump is sexist.
Right.
To the extent that people believe it, they're going to believe it. To the extent that they don't, they don't. Joe Biden's going to have a tough time, bringing this up now, without a doubt. But those people who are motivated by that are already happening. And so maybe on some level, that it neutralizes those people who voted for Donald Trump because you were sticking it to women on some level, which is conceivable. There's two realms, right, in which you assess this. One is, sort of like the moral realm, and the other is the utility realm. I don't make my voting decisions. The morality of my voting decisions are not based upon as if this was a multiple choice question. It's a binary choice, right? And so the moral equation is, what is the moral net of voting for one person versus the other? I mean, if I walk away, I'm just saying, like, I'm abdicating my, that's just about my own self-righteousness. That's just about my own sort of like moral righteousness, which, as far as I'm concerned, like you might as well just say, like, oh, I'm ultra Orthodox religious person, and I don't deal with the profane matters of the state. I mean, that's what that is, as far as I'm concerned. To the extent that you contemplate any morality, is really between these two choices. And then it's really more, from my perspective, is a utility one. What worries me about this is two things. One, could it depress the vote of, I don't think it's, I think, look, there's a lot of people who are saying, like, I'm not going to vote for Joe Biden. He's because of this, who I think are being disingenuous. I think they don't want to vote for Joe Biden, and they're going to look for a reason to proclaim that they're not. But it's conceivable that it could depress the votes of some people who are, I can't bring myself to voting for a person like that. I'm not sure about that. I don't know.
I think
the other part of that, let me just, is we don't know. And if people do feel this is a credible accusation, we don't know what else is out there.
Right. Exactly.
Because these things generally don't happen once.
He has been in the Senate since he was 30 years old. He has been in the Senate of the 70s and 80s and 90s. And if you remember any of the stories that came out of the Senate during that time, in Washington during that time, it was not known for being a fair place to women. There's a lot of drinking. There was a lot of bipartisan drinking. Crazy stories came out of that era. And I just don't see Joe Biden, with his on-camera personality with women, coming out of that era not having a couple more stories. I don't know for sure.
Right.
But, as you said, usually there's a few more, and I'm just surprised that it actually hasn't come up much earlier, given how feminist groups before Biden was really in the race were frustrated by him. I feel like maybe there was some sort of institutional hush-hush happening for many years.
Well, I mean, look how long it took this one accusation to come out. I mean, and according to her, he said, like, "Come on, man, I thought you liked me," and it's a very, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that this is the way that he basically, was like asking if she likes him. Is it true? What I understand, the messages I've been getting, are these messages true? Or, if that's the way that he approached this one time, it's not inconceivable that he didn't approach it other times. And we also say, like, people who may have felt, women who may have, just like completely hypothetical, but if they experienced something like this with Biden before, and it was something that, like, they were willing to sort of, and particularly in that era, there was a lot of times where you're just like, guys will be guys.
Right.
But these moments are being reevaluated. And, part of the reason why apparently this neighbor came out, even though she said she's still going to vote for Biden. She says she's still going to vote for Biden, and she's been a Biden fan. You can look back on our social media and see it. She says, I had to come out and defend Tara, because it's one thing to say, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden, even though I know he's bad here because I want to get rid of Donald Trump. It's another thing to watch her get maligned because of something he did. Right. Now, that's a dynamic that could end up, if there are other women out there who went through something similar to what Tara Reid went through, at one point could say like, I want Donald Trump out, but I also can't live with myself if I see this woman being gaslit and harangued in this manner, because, you know, over time we've seen this happen, you know, with folks like Monica Lewinsky and in many respects, like, you know, Anita Hill is not exactly the same scenarios, but somehow they always get to be villainized, it seems like. And it's quite possible this may spur people to come out and say, like, I had something, not exactly the same situation with Biden, similar. And to, at the very least, you know, provide support for her. So this is a real dilemma for, you know, I mean, really for Joe Biden and for the people around Joe Biden and for the funders who are supporting Joe Biden, because, you know, Joe Biden doesn't have broad based funding support. This is like some big fundraisers are sitting down and they're making the assessment that we're talking about right now. And
it's tough because, I mean, I think ultimately this just comes down to the strategic, the voting process of the voters that are going to be influencing this election. I mean, this is the hard conversation we as progressives have to understand. Like, I think a lot of people in the movement don't necessarily get, because, you know, we're excited and we're activists, but the second the primary ends, the general election comes down to what percentage of our base are we absolutely going to get, and if we get more than that, fantastic. What percentage of women are we absolutely going to get, no matter what? Because historically, even if it's like Bill Clinton, who had real allegations against him during, like, visible, you know, allegations against him during a general election, they still showed up. What percentage of, you know, voters, men in the Rust Belt do we think we're going to get, and what do we need? And I think at the end of the day, I mean, this is the unsavory truth about the Democratic electorate in this binary system that we have. There will absolutely be a core group of women who'd make that decision and say, I would rather have Donald Trump out and a bad Biden if it means that the Supreme Court, you know, Roe v. Wade. I'm not saying everyone's thinking that way, but maybe enough in their mindset strategically. And
also, if blankety blank is his running mate, she's great. And she has a good chance of being president. And, you know, maybe when he picks blankety blank, we don't know who it is, he says, there's a good chance she's going to be filling my shoes, you know, like, not necessarily coming out and saying like, I'm done after 4 years or 2 years or 18 months or whatever. But even if he's like implying that like after 8 years, she's the one, you know, like, we don't know. And so this is, I think we're just going to need to start to read the tea leaves and start to see if we get this sort of cascading sort of like a media narrative, and what other, you know, sort of luminaries in the Democratic Party do. You know, AOC was, I think, the only major sort of political figure to come out and say, we need to take these things seriously, at least in terms of vetting these accusations. We cannot dismiss them out of hand. I wonder now what we're going to hear, particularly yesterday, and Nancy Pelosi and Pramila Jayapal endorsed Joe Biden. Like, the timing of all this is, but you know, but had it happened like 3 days before Super Tuesday, people would have said the timing of this is weird. Like, there is no good time to have the guy who was the front runner for the majority of the campaign get one of these accusations. And it's not, like, let's be clear, there were, you know, not these kind of accusations, but like handsy accusations suggesting that Biden, you know, didn't know where his desires or, you know, ended, and other people's, you know, sort of like bodily integrity started.
Which is actually an indication to me of his power, right? Men who have been senators since they were 30 have had a tremendous amount of power when the rules were a little bit different.
Yep.
for decades. And if he's saying things like this about Tara Reid, like, I thought she was in, whatever, I thought she liked me too. And maybe he thinks, just as he thinks that touching senators, state senators, or aides, or U.S. senators' wives inappropriately is accepted. I think, they're no matter what, I think people are going to come out and share their stories. I don't know if they're going to be as as serious. I'm not serious is not the right word, as damning as Tara Reid's,
Right.
but I have no doubt that there's going to be more stories. What I think is probably going to happen from the Democratic media establishment is they're going to try to block them from appearing on cable news, just so it doesn't distract away from Trump. I don't
Right.
actually think it'll impact the vote that they want. That's my hard truth in this is we as progressives, we have a tremendous amount of power in the primary. And right now, especially with COVID and with Trump, we're not getting, I know a lot of people are frustrated. They're like, well, why aren't people taking this seriously? And I think a lot of it has to do with just this media landscape that we're in. It's not because these aren't serious allegations. It's just, we live in a world right now where Donald Trump.
And let's be honest too. I think there's a lot of people who are making the calculation.
Yeah.
I want Trump out. He's the best shot to get Trump
That's
out.
what I'm saying. He's screwing up a pandemic.
That's it.
And it's not worth it to a lot of folks.
And, we are the guests we spoke to today. I mean, we are stock markets, artificially inflated right now.
Right.
But the fact of the matter, this is not going away. So we'll see. Calling from a 240 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, this is Brianna calling in from Bowling Green, Virginia.
Hello, Brianna. What's on your mind?
I just want to say, for the progressives that thought that the whole Tara Reid story is going to force Joe Biden to, I don't think Joe Biden's going anywhere. I think we're basically stuck with him. But not dealing with this now will come biting us back in the behind later on down the line. Because is this Tara Reid story, I believe her.
Are you there?
We lost her. Yeah.
Hello? Hello? Brianna?
Yeah.
Oh, I just lost connection. That was me.
Oh.
Yeah, there's some type of delay. Sometimes I get booted off.
But you can hear me, right?
I can hear you. Yeah. I'll try this again. Bear with me, folks. Technology. Let's go. Let's talk about Donald Trump. Brianna, if you're still on the line, just bear with us. I've somehow lost my internet connection here now. I don't know why that happens, but I can hear my sister, my daughter screaming.
It's okay. I can hear my dad yelling in the background. I just had to text
there you
him.
go.
Keep it down, please.
Welcome to these shows on these days. All right.
Sorry,
Well, Tara, Brianna, hang on for a moment. I can't seem to connect with my Wi-Fi for whatever reason on that computer. Let's go to Donald Trump. He's being asked. Apparently, they were convinced after his whole inject people with bleach comments and scrub their lungs, that maybe they shouldn't do these briefings anymore. And on Monday, early in the day, they had announced, we're not doing these. It's a waste of time. It's not worth it. He tweeted it out. And then apparently he had a change of heart. He's like, I'm not going to have anything to do today. And so I got to go back out there. Here's Donald Trump on the White House lawn yesterday, being asked a question on the unnecessary deaths. Here we go. This is clip number. Oh yeah, you got it.
It's incredible what we've done together over a short period of time. I want to thank our Vice President for the task force and the work. Every day it gets better, and we had a fantastic call with the governors today. And I would say that they are as thrilled as they can be, considering that the fact is that there has been so much unnecessary death in this country. It could have been stopped, and it could have been stopped short, but somebody a long time ago, it seems, decided not to do it that way. and the whole world is suffering because of it. 184 countries at least. But I want
What is he talking about?
Obama.
Obama is responsible for all the countries to
That's my
decide
guess.
not to do what way?
My guess was China.
That's what I thought too. Maybe he meant China.
I think there's a weird sort of unconscious thing going on where he's having like a Dimsdale moment, Matt. Maybe like a Nathaniel Hawthorne sort of session. Yeah.
Whoa. Take it easy. What show is this? It's not a literary hangover.
The Scarlet Letter of the Priest, Arthur Dimsdale, starts seeing like comments. I don't know, he has a guilty conscience, basically.
Yes, and that's it. It's
projecting.
like, I guess I should have. I mean, not me.
Sorry, the maximum number of callers has been reached.
Now I can't even get on my own.
Try again later.
I can't even get
It
in
can
my
boot
own.
people off.
Thank you for calling into the
There we
Majority
go.
Report. Please use no speakerphone and give your one
I'm
comment.
back up. I don't know
ready.
what's happening with my
Listen for
Wi-Fi.
Sam
Of
to
course,
call
it's
out
just
your
one more
area
problem
code.
I have.
Sam will be with you shortly.
We'll get to the calls in a second when I show up on the screen here. Yeah, it's nuts. I think he's losing it a little bit, just a little bit.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Here's Donald Trump asked by OWN. He's now like Fox is on the outs. It feels like that it's
Well,
basically
Kayleigh McEnany's there, so it can't be that far. I don't know. I never buy that.
maybe he like thought he was helicoptering in to pick her up, but he's being fed by OWN. This is what One News, what is it? One American Network or something to that effect. And this is at his press conference. And Michael Flynn, now like the Department of Justice done a 180. The entire, I mean, I've spoken to people who basically tell me like they're shocked at what's going on with the U.S. attorneys, that everything has become so politicized. This is a guy who pled guilty.
Yeah.
And a judge who saw all the information, right? I mean, forget about the stories of like he was cornered and he had no idea. A judge was like, is this all you're asking for this guy? Because when I look at this guy's like near treasonous. And but here's Donald Trump being asked by an OWN reporter. Not just are you okay with this guy? Listen to this.
No, and this you can get from any other country. I think if they're being honest, not only do we have the most testing in the world by far, but we have by far the best testing. OAN, please go ahead.
Mr. President, thank you. As I'd like to switch gears and talk about General Flynn. There are reports circulating now that he may well be.
They keep doing stories on this reporter because this is his favorite reporter apparently. I don't know her name, but she is now like she's the one who gets all the questions at the thing.
I think Chanel Ryan.
Yeah. All right, continue.
Fully exonerated this week. If that were the case, is there any reason why you would not bring him back into the administration?
I will only say this. I think that General Flynn is a wonderful man. He had a wonderful career, and it was a disgrace what happened to General Flynn. Let's see what happens now. But what happened to General Flynn should never happen again in our country. What happened to other people should never happen again in our country. What happened to your President of the United States should never again be allowed to happen.
President of the United States. This is a guy who was on the payroll of a foreign government to kidnap and offering plans to kidnap someone who was in the United States on behalf of this foreign government.
Right. Well, what does he get out of this, by the way? Like, okay, say all that is true. What is the point of saying that on the record with possibly a planted question? What is he trying to flex? What's the goal, the strategic goal here in saying, essentially, I'd be open to it?
He has to say that because that is when he exonerates Flynn, he exonerates himself. Right. When he says that what happened to Flynn was wrong. That's why, I mean, he lays it out right there. This should have never happened to Flynn. And what happened to your president should have never happened to your president. That's it. That's the whole game right there.
That seemed like a threat to me. You know, how far will he go in eliminating the potential to hold your government accountable in any way, whether it's with Flynn or the president, and cancel elections, or what? I don't know, whatever the next step is.
He's fired every inspector general that he could fire. He has gotten rid of all of the accountability that he has the ability to get rid of in that administration. I mean, it's nuts. All right, let's go to the phones. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. This is John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. How are you, John?
I'm good. Good. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing if Justice Democrats and brand new Congress endorse Morgan Harper.
And matriarch.
$750,000 can pull off an upset in the 3rd District of Ohio. She's running against Joyce Beatty, and the district encompasses most of the Columbus area. Statewide, there's already been a million votes already received, and 1.7 million ballots have been mailed out. You did an interview with Harper on November 1st of last year.
That's right, I did.
And she's definitely in the top 10 left candidates who have a decent chance of pulling off that upset. That will be a great jolt to the left movement if she can do that. So that's a big event for tonight, and when the votes started being counted. So here's a quote from Bernie Sanders on the March 12th of Democracy Now! He says, "While our campaign has won the ideological debate, we are losing the debate over electability. I cannot tell you how many people our campaign has spoken to who have said, I like what your campaign stands for, but I'm going to vote for Biden because I think Joe is the best candidate to defeat Donald Trump." End of quote. We've heard that statement all over the country. So, you know, I've called in, I guess, 5 or 6 times before either candidate actually entered the race. And because, you know, electability has been a factor, you know, since that time period, you know, January of 2019. And, you know, I think that this was a major mistake by the Sanders campaign in not saying, you know, that nobody can really measure this. You know, if you look at this historically, nobody can know. I mean, even 3 months, you know, 4 months before the election. I mean, most people who understand and have followed campaigns realize that after Labor Day is when people, you know, the average voter starts really paying attention, you know, focusing in on the election. And so, you know, I don't understand why they didn't do that. Instead, you know, they put up this thing. I mean, about, you know, Bernie beats Trump, and I think Bernie, you know, would have beaten Trump. And you know, I guess that there is still this incredibly small chance that he could be the nominee because of Biden. But it's just the idea that, you know, that he put so much of his eggs in that basket, and instead of saying, like, you know, we can't know who's going to beat Trump.
Well,
we just can't do that.
John, I know.
You know, like I said at the top of the show, I'm going to try very hard to prepare the movement for. If you want to channel your energy into something, definitely channel it into these local races, because, you know, she's running against a candidate Joyce Beatty, who Mary Jo Kilroy. I don't know if anybody remembers her. She was a very progressive congresswoman for campaign finance reform. She was challenged by Joyce Beatty, who's a member of the CBC, and challenging the CBC is not an easy feat, even as a progressive. There are a lot of folks who just won't touch it because of what it signifies. And Morgan got that early attention because she was, you know, Jonathan Weissman, I think it was, or who was in the New York Times, said that she was a white person challenging Joyce Beatty, and Morgan is Black. So it was, these are the issues that challengers are facing all over the country. Ohio's tough too.
It's very difficult.
We need infrastructure.
Here is, and we'll get to, I want to get to the New York primary being canceled, but
Okay.
let's talk about this guy, Michael Knowles. This guy's working really hard, trying to get it out there. And he's on the Daily Wire, which is Ben Shapiro's company. And here is Michael Knowles defending, again, this is just like, we all know that Donald Trump is just the intersection between how ignorant he is and how intelligent he thinks he is almost like a piece of art. We also know that there was a spike in residents in New York City and around the country, calls to poison centers, because he was suggesting that maybe if you figure out a way of getting the Clorox inside and just you kill the virus that way by scrubbing the lungs or something, or it's, super duper ultraviolet light. Here's Michael Knowles defending Donald Trump on this.
Was President Trump being sarcastic in the first answer? No, I don't think so. I think he was being flippant. He was being optimistic. He was being a little loose with his words, but I don't think he was being sarcastic. Okay. What was it? It was a comment that he didn't articulate that well. Who cares? Who cares, right? Is anybody shooting Lysol into their bodies? No. Is President Trump doing a good job?
Pause it. Actually, like I said, spike in residents ingesting household cleaners, Poison Control Center. This is reported around the country. So yes, but I don't even know what the jibber jabber he was saying before then. It was, he didn't answer in the right way. He wasn't answering anything.
Yeah.
He was trying to impress the doctors who were sitting to his right. I want credit. I want credit. If it does turn out that you can do that, I just want everybody to know it was my idea first.
Right.
Let's continue on with this. And for the life of me, why is Michael Knowles like looking as if he's like doing a show for other people? I don't get this.
Lysol into their bodies? No. Is President Trump doing a good job on this coronavirus thing? Yes. Have other people been much less responsible on this coronavirus thing?
No.
Yes. Move on. Okay. Also, beyond the mere fact that no one wants you to inject Lysol into your body, the one thing I'll say in the president's defense here is we do regularly use poisons as medical treatments, right? The key example of this would be chemotherapy. We inject poison into people's bodies to kill certain cells because it will kill the cancer cells that are rapidly dividing. So again, nobody's saying shoot up Lysol. However, it's not completely outlandish to use poisons inside the body or to have some application of something that would otherwise be poisonous to treat a disease.
How is this not taken down?
I mean,
Seriously.
Well, also, like, how does this guy like wake up in the morning? I know he's a very religious guy, right? Isn't that his shtick, Brendan? He's super religious or something.
I'm not sure about him. I think that might be the other guy, Andy Clavitt or whatever.
Oh, okay. I get confused between these right-wing hacks. But I mean, how do you look at yourself in the mirror and be able to say this stuff with a straight face just for money? Like, I mean, why can't you just say, like, he may have gotten this one wrong. Probably best to leave this up to the doctors.
Clicks.
Like, I mean, honestly, like,
how does anything happen? Like, are we kidding? Everybody. It's on the left, the right, the center.
But this one is just so like,
Of course it is.
People put poison, chemotherapy is poison. So maybe the idea of taking poison generally, as like a way of scrubbing your lungs is not so crazy.
Yeah, when you have to go on chemotherapy and then you have to take medication for the rest of your life, 5-10 pills to make sure that the rest of your body balances out.
It's also just sort of like he's taking the literal idea of Lysol on a counter.
Right.
Why couldn't you do that with your lungs?
Try it, buddy.
Oh,
no, but a real question. I mean, you're somebody who operates in the space, you understand the business of it. Why is this allowed to be up there? Why don't they take this down? Why don't they demonetize this type of stuff?
Well, I don't know if he's got it on YouTube. I mean, that could be just something directly from, where is that? That could be something just like they put on Daily Wire. And why don't they have that guy talking to the camera? Like, I get people, like I like to look down or look around, isn't that? But this guy's like intensely talking, like, come on.
I love that off-center shot at the Daily Wire. It's like their house aesthetic, basically.
It's, first of all, it's like 25 years old, that shot, that as an innovative camera technology. But it also is just a reminder, like, we're talking to someone out there.
Also,
not to, like, you normies. We're talking to that guy.
He is on YouTube, by the way. The show is on YouTube.
Yeah,
Full
I don't
show.
know how YouTube gets away with like leaving that up there, but unbelievable. All right, so let's play this clip. We're talking about the New York primary. This had been pushed to June. My understanding is have they decided that they're going to do it all by mail at this point?
As of right now, yes, the remaining parts of the primary, and it's still not entirely clear. I could be wrong, but I heard that everybody's getting a ballot as of a couple of days ago. The way that it worked, and I was talking to someone who worked at the Board of Elections, and they didn't even get the up-to-date information. You have to, a few days ago, this was the rule, and just to be safe, I would still do this. If you were planning on voting by mail, you have to go online, print out a form to request a vote by mail ballot, send it in, and then they mail it to wherever you are, so that you can vote by mail. That's how it's always worked, frankly. So I don't really know if there's some.
But
they've been all over
my
the
understanding. Is it not the case now that you don't need to justify it? Because it used to be to get a vote by mail like that, absentee ballot, you needed to justify that you were going to be out of the county on the day of the election.
I don't know how you would though, because I printed it out and I looked at it and I just had to say where I was.
Well, that's my point, is that you no longer have to justify, because I don't think they want to have an in-person election, but I'm not sure about that. But they could certainly do it all by mail. So the risk associated with having the presidential election primary, in addition to, or actually, I guess putting another name on the ballot is all it is. I mean, they're not going to, is negligible if there is one. But apparently,
yeah, that's not the reason.
New York Board of Election co-director Douglas Kellner got the message probably from Andrew Cuomo, and you know this probably better than I do. And Cuomo said, like, this is my solid for Biden, so I get a little bit of extra juice amongst his peeps. Here is this guy announcing that we're not going to do an election.
And what the Sanders supporters want is essentially a beauty contest that, given the situation with the public health emergency that exists now, seems to be unnecessary and indeed frivolous.
Okay. You ready for it?
Yeah.
So I know people aren't going to love what I say here, but let me just preface this with the Unity Reform Commission. I was the New York representative, okay? I was appointed by Bernie as a New York representative, and we had, part of the process was to reform the primary process, because there were states that were not conducting their Democratic primaries, presidential primaries, fairly or properly. And in New York, we have registration dates that are all over the place, not consolidated to one date. And prior to this year, once the Senate changed, we did not have our primary dates. They were all over the place. The assembly races were in September. The congressional federal races were in June. The presidential primary was in April. And so, you know,
And why does that exist? Why would they do that?
Yeah. So one of the reasons why that happens is people don't know when the election is. And so you get lower turnout. Anytime there's lower turnout, it favors an incumbent. And in a state like New York, we have the second to lowest turnout in the country, just above Louisiana. Yet we are a Democratic run state. And I'm going to be extremely clear that the Democratic Party, for the most part, the membership is slated and picked by Andrew Cuomo. So this state is, when we say Cuomo's state, it is, we are all I mean, there's a Senate, right? There's a Senate leader. There is an assembly leader that's a Democrat. He works more with the Republicans than he works with the kind of centrist Senate leader and the kind of centrist, maybe left-leaning assembly member, same of them. So, this is a situation that is, I mean, he had the IDC so that he could appear to be progressive when he was vetoing, so he didn't have to veto legislation. We know what the jam is. Electoral reform should not be a controversial reform. Yet he used the IDC to block any electoral reforms. Then when the Senate became Democratic, we passed some in the last year, so it's slightly better. With that being said, I think Bernie made the wrong move here. And I know a lot of people don't really understand what I'm saying here. First off, Bernie's own campaign, or whatever's left of it, advisors didn't know when the budget was passed. So their entire excuse was that, this was supposed to happen during budget negotiations, and they listed this date, and it was a few days after the budget was passed. My concern with the Bernie campaign senior advisors is that they never really took political party politics and machinations seriously enough. And in a state like New York, if you are going to create this fight, if you are going to use a legal strategy, if you are going to ask that all these activists run as delegates, you better be prepared and you better have a smart strategy. If you go for the king, right, you don't want to miss, you might as well. And that's the problem with Cuomo, is that he knows that. And because we tried to get these reforms passed after the New Year Reform Commission, and what happened was, first off, we lost. It was a hard fight. We had planned out months in advance. We had brought in coalition groups. The coalition was not broad enough. It was not strong enough. And it was happening simultaneously with the IDC. So I think they all worked together, because at the end of the day, the IDC was taken out. But that required an extraordinary amount of organizing and strategy and coalition building. And for something like this, to just drop it and say hey, delegates, sue the state board of elections. Hey, delegates, do this. I think it's irresponsible on the part of Bernie to lead activists into the fire, because I've been on I've received that fire, as a lot of other activists in New York have. And I think some people were reluctant to step up and say, I'm going to use this as my opportunity to challenge, when they knew what the end result was going to be. Right. So I think, this is extremely frustrating, but it's also part of a bigger narrative. If Bernie really wanted to impact this, I would have gone to Biden himself as Bernie Sanders, the human being, and said, Biden, will you join me in saying that the primary, in the name of democracy, in the name of helping down ballot races, in the name of having a vibrant party, we want to keep the primary, because people just want to exercise. Biden's going to win, okay? It's not like a question. And frankly, Bernie's not even going to get that many delegates, because most people think that Bernie's out of the race.
But this is really, it seems to me, about helping challengers. Yes, so Jamal Bowman with Elliot Engel.
There's two progressives in that race.
Yes,
and there's no polling, so there's no way of knowing.
No way of knowing. That's true. And there's others. I've interviewed many people running, challenging across New York, and they want to protect the incumbents. And the way you do that is by making sure that people are not tuned into the race, because Bernie and Biden aren't basically competing. Because that if you're having that a significant percentage of Bernie voters are going to be more inclined to vote for the challenger than the sitting congressperson. And this is, it's that naked, and it's really,
I think that's where the bad, Bernie should have made it about that, because it's very hard to hide from. He should have made it less about the convention, which I think, again, I'm a reformer of the Democratic Party. The reform's not going to happen at the convention. The reform's going to happen after the convention, during the DNC membership votes. We played this game before. We saw what happened afterwards. We don't have any leverage now. You think that suddenly, if we pass a progressive platform again, that every single Democratic nominee is going to run on that? I'd like to see Joe Manchin run on that platform. I'd like to see Barbara Feinstein run on the Barbara Boxer's.
But the point you're making is that he should have been focused more on building the next generation of progressive leaders and Congress people, because this is where the, to the extent that he could exert any power, that's the real power.
That's right.
What you're saying is that, yes, he could have gone in with more delegates into the convention. He could have had more of a say in the rules committee or the platform committee. But at the end of the day, the platform and the rules committee are what they are. What really matters is getting people in these seats in Congress who are going to support other progressives like AOC and Omar and Tlaib and Presley and Porter and et cetera, et cetera. Get more like bodies, younger. They're all younger than, I mean, we have Congress people from New York who've been in there for decades and they function like that. And the only way we're going to get real change is to get this new generation, these younger generation, both in, like literally in terms of age, but also this new generation in terms of the way that they perceive politics.
Yeah.
They got to get in office. And the way you get them in office, at least at this point, in terms of what Bernie Sanders can do, is really, I can help them fundraise and I can make sure that I'm bringing out my people to vote for them.
That's right.
And that's it.
And no presidential primary. I also believe that because it's like common knowledge that Bernie Sanders is not running for president anymore. And because some of these districts, they're not Jamal Bowman's district, Andam's district, Allie Engel's district. That is a universe of 700,000. I talked to somebody who works in that district and they were like, even if Bernie were on the ballot, it would still only, the people who would think that Bernie's still running for president and turn out and would not vote for, would be influenced to vote for down ballot that weren't already showing up just to vote for down ballot is still very minimal. Right. So at the end of the day, I actually don't think the presidential primary, I think it's more of a theory than it is an actuality, especially in the era of COVID. With mail-in ballots.
I mean, it's a tough proposition to test, but I can say this. I do know that in Wisconsin, I think they felt very grateful that if there was going to be, because they had a lot of not just primaries, but general election things to vote on there.
Right.
I think they were very, very happy that Sanders had stayed in, at least for that race. Now it's not analogous because that's the way that they won that Supreme Court seat. And that's
that was different. But I mean,
yes, it's different.
There are people like Melanie DeRigo, who's running against Tom Suozzi. He is a disgusting Democrat who literally caucuses with Republicans, and part of his district is in Queens. She's an extraordinary candidate. She's getting smeared. You know how much it would impact her. I mean, I say this with AOC too, and all people who have perceived power in the progressive movement is what I love about what you're doing with Ring of Fire. When they have early support, not late support when it's politically expedient and obviously works to their advantage, but that early support, the way Ro Khanna does it, helps these candidates fundraise, get press, endorsements. It helps them build coalitions. They need stakeholders there. And now, I mean, I'll say this about my own race. Listen, Bernie's not running for president anymore. I don't care. If he had endorsed me in my race, it would have been done. Case closed. I also wouldn't have been smeared and attacked. Even if he had picked up the phone and said, stop it, you're dividing the movement. Don't attack her anymore. I think that this is the kind of politics our leaders need to understand, and especially the ones who have faced challengers, that the more you're there to support the others out there who you might be talking to behind the scenes all the time and giving them advice, to actually, there's no loss if Bernie supports Samalise Lopez in the Bronx. If anything, she's suddenly very likely going to win that seat.
Right. All right. We'll get, I wanted to talk about this. So apparently, the Attorney General in New York State has been looking into the worker protection practices. Remember now, OSHA, which is the federal agency that is supposed to protect workers in their work environment, is basically, you got to put out an APB for them at this point. But Letitia James wrote a letter to Amazon, apparently obtained by NPR, saying that the company may have broken the state's whistleblower laws for firing a warehouse worker who helped organize a protest in Staten Island, Also claims that Amazon may have violated federal safety standards for providing inadequate protections to warehouse workers in New York. So these are ongoing investigations, ones that should be done, frankly, by the National Labor Relations Board and OSHA. But I think James knows they're not going to be taken up by them. And here, taking matters into their own hands is some Amazon workers protesting and walking off the job. This is in, let's play this clip. It is in Minnesota, walking off the job at midnight.
Another reason why we're out here tonight is because Amazon is targeting specific people. We are being told to stay 6 feet apart. However, that rule does not apply for everyone. We've seen management do it right in front of us. We've seen safety that are supposed to keep us safe do it. Yet we, as associates, are being targeted. And we have Bashir, an associate from Stowe, that was fired because he wasn't following the social distancing rule. However, that rule seemed to only apply for specific people. Another thing I want to mention and emphasize is that UPT, unlimited UPT, will stop on May 1st. In this pandemic that does not seem to be getting any better in this country. How is it possible in the month of Ramadan, where we're all fasting, all working, coming in and night out, that you guys are telling us that our UPT, unlimited UPT, will stop? When there's already two confirmed cases that you guys have probably hidden for us for how long? And the only reason why you guys let it now public is because you guys feel like you should, to look good, for scrutiny. So Amazon, I'm telling you, and each and every single one associate is requesting that you guys from here on out make sure that our safety is a priority, that you guys treat associates fairly, that you guys make sure the 6 feet policy rule makes sense, and that it also applies to each and every single person, and that you guys extend this unlimited UPT. However, because it's the month of Ramadan, everyone's fasting, and we don't know how many more confirmed positive cases are about to come.
So there it is. We're watching, labor take it into their own hands. UPT is that's basically paid to unpaid time off. Let's put it that way. So they need some time off. Ramadan, they can't eat during the day to celebrate Ramadan. It's just unbelievable the way that they're being treated at this point. And there's nobody in government.
Or anything? Do you know if there's any sort of class action lawsuit? I mean, especially during Ramadan. I mean, there seems to be
I would imagine we're going to start to see some lawsuits, and not uncoincidentally, this is the big ask that Mitch McConnell is now placing, he's placing in the next round of coronavirus relief, is going to be a basic blanket liability for not just, medical care. There's already some of that in the first round, but employers and businesses across the board, so that they are basically shorn of any type of liability, forcing people to come into work. And you're going to see a lot of that on the back door, basically so-called tort reform in this bill. There's going to be an attempt. We'll see if the Democrats stop it. But yeah, without having a functioning OSHA and without having a functioning Department of Labor, this is what you're going to get. Yeah. All right, let's take one more phone call, and then I'll take some IMs and we'll get out of here. Calling from a 612 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Bullfrog again.
Bullfrog, how are you? What's on your mind?
I just had a quick thing. So like the right is really good at messaging. Is good the right word? And but yeah, I just thought like Democrats really need to up their game on getting creative ways of messaging out there. So I was thinking like something I'm Bullfrog, and I'm here to say you got to vote Biden in a major way. After you build your blanket fort, become a member to Majority Report. Say what? Become a member to Majority Report. Say what? Become a member to Majority Report. Excuse boo. Or something like that, you know?
That's pretty good.
Sounds great.
I don't think you'll ever be.
Share it.
I don't think you'll ever be Silk or Diamond, but appreciate the call.
You know,
Bullpuck.
Michael's book has pictures.
Does it have pictures?
Does it? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it needs a second edition. But
We'll see. I haven't seen it.
all right, take that, Sam.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Oh my God. Lots of creativity there.
Yes. Bullprog has made a ad for us, I think, that we're going to run on YouTube too. All right. Let me take a couple of IMs and then we will get out of here. Barbie. I'm a new member in Vancouver. That's Vancouver, Canada. And waking up to you every morning, you and the gang are the best to start my day. Thank you. Thames Darwin. Sam, the wife and I have been binge watching Chris Guest movies, and I realized that you also had some of your sound drops from A Mighty Wind. Also, did you know David Cross has a very short but funny scene in Waiting for Guffman? I do, yes. We also watched 2 of Maron's stand-up shows, saw a couple of John Benjamin's Arby commercials. On a complete unrelated note, I have a question. Is there a special kind of cable I need to be able to watch Who's the Caboose? Do I need a satellite dish or a Ouija board? Any help? I think you can get Who's the Caboose on iTunes. iTunes or Amazon.
Ouija board.
Audio John, my pillow guy sounds remarkably like Jesse Ventura. Co-video. Sam, do you or Nomiki know of any good books written on the subject of recent New York political corruption?
Recent? Yeah, I think it's sold out though. It's not really about corruption, but it's about Andrew Cuomo, and I think it would be informative. It's called The Contender. It's maybe 10 years old, not even 10 years old. It's about Andrew Cuomo. The biographer does not write about politics anymore. I think partly because he got too many threats from Andrew Cuomo, from Joe Percoco, who's now in jail, who is Andrew Cuomo's, right-hand guy. Anything by Wayne Barrett. If you want to, go a little bit further back, but it's all very relevant today because he wrote the first book about Trump, the first reporter about Trump, 2 on Giuliani, an amazing book called City for Sale. I don't even know if they still publish these books, but if you can find them, City for Sale is fantastic.
Majority Report Zach. I think at this point it's clear Tara Reid has been telling both versions of her accusations to different people over the years. How is the public supposed to parse this? Well, we discussed that already. Administrator Neverman closing on $8 billion. Oh boy. All right. Everyone loves blankety blank, the female vice president nominee, who boys alleged sex offender Joe Biden. 5 minutes later, we regret to inform you blankety blank is a fascist. Train boy, Barack Obama spent more of his political capital roadblocking Bernie than he did defending Obamacare, DACA, or the Iran deal. What more does the Democratic Party need to do to demonstrate they hate progressives and don't want their support? Well, I mean, is this a surprise?
Yeah.
I agree. There's no doubt that they protect their left flank. But we just have to get to the point where we overrun it. And it was close. It was close. Hegemony Cricket.
If
Mike Lindell spent so many years writing that memoir that the last 7 years of the book are about him writing his memoir. Brock from VA, really loving the Nobi Keith show and glad she's a part of the Nobi Keith.
Maybe it was a typo.
Or is it just the making fun of the way I say your name? I don't say Nobi
I don't
Keith.
know. Have you seen the meme though? Someone did a meme of you saying my
I
name.
know. I've seen it. I can't help it. I am sorry. Oh, but I remember running down from my dorm room in street in celebration of electing a quote, black president. I also never thought I would see a president injecting Lysol and deep throating a UV lamp in order to combat a virus. Thank you, God, because seriously, what are the odds? Louis, seems to me canceling the presidential primary actually helped the progressive candidates. Anything to deter the establishment voters to turn out or mail in, it has to help. Meanwhile, if these progressive candidates have made their case, people will be inspired to vote. Bernie dropped out of the race. No one should expect normal people to be interested in Democratic Party minutia to care at this point. I mean, that's a theory, right? I mean, that's how AOC sort of snuck in, but it's also very difficult. The power, and you said this, Nomiki, that the power of insurgent candidates are on the ground. They don't have the money.
Right.
And in this instance, you need money because you can't have people knocking on their doors. it really depends on how far they got in their campaign in many respects.
And it depends on the district too. I mean, we have to keep in mind that AOC's district overlapped with Astoria, where I live, which is the most progressive concentrated district in the country. I mean, neighborhood in the country.
Right.
So it was like a perfect storm for her. And I wish that people didn't use her as a case study, because it really was a wacko like election in which she was an extraordinary candidate.
Right.
With this district and a, out to lunch ranking lawmaker who controlled a machine too, by the way.
Matt from Mass. Sam, can you explain what the middle class is and why it seems like such an obsession of Democrats? To me, it just sounds like a rebranding of the petty bourgeoisie. But does it have an actual independent definition? I don't think it does. But I think people just basically said, I think it developed during the Great Compression, where we had the least amount of wealth inequality that we've experienced in this country during like the 50s and 60s. And I think that's basically, to the extent that it's the definition, it's like, you don't need two breadwinners to pay for, college. You don't need two breadwinners to take a vacation, that you can own a house in the suburbs. I mean, it is just something that resonates with people. And I don't know why. It's like, by saying middle class, you avoid really dealing with class. But they're like, we don't have time to get into, but that Eric Levitt's piece was very interesting as to like why there isn't class consciousness in the way that it's been in the past. Diamond and Silk Fan 1. Matt is a typical intellectual elite, saying that the words cult and culture share a root, but then not telling us what it is. All right, 3 more. Shelly, if we have 2 pussy grabbers to choose from, then I pick the one that can read a PDB. Joker mode. They should put up Inslee. And the final I am of the day. On the topic of campaign suspension, Bernie's having a volunteer appreciation call for all the campaign phone bank volunteers tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern. I get what Nomi says about the campaign being over, but it does make you wonder if there are other motives. We shall see. Nomi, as always, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody.
All right, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in.